In this video, we replaced the starter on a universal M30 diesel engine for our Catalina 30 sailboat. We're not experts on this topic, but we're learning as we go. We're slowly getting to know the engine through maintenance and gradually replacing worn out parts.
So if you saw a couple videos ago, you'll know that we were having some troubles with our starter. So today we actually found a place that rebuilds starters. So we're gonna remove the starter, get them to rebuild it instead of buying a new one, and then we'll just reinstall it and hopefully that'll fix our engine starting problems. First step, we're gonna remove all power from the starter itself. So we're gonna turn off our battery switch and then also remove the wires from the battery itself.
We removed all the wires from the positive terminal of the battery just to be safe, but really you only need to disconnect wires coming from the engine. Next, we opened up the engine compartment so we could access the starter.
So this right here is the starter, which we'll be taking off, and then it's connected with two bolts back here. And then there's also a bundle of wires that we have to take off right down there.
This is the top bolt and the bottom bolt. The wires are located on the bottom side of the starter. We started at the top bolt using a wrench to loosen it.
We're using a 1/2-inch wrench for this, and it's going very slowly.
Then we used a socket with an extension for the bottom bolt.
Okay, the socket is much easier, especially for the bottom one. And then it should pop off. Okay, I can do it. Number one.
Once we removed both bolts, we were able to flip the starter over and remove the wires.
Number two. Okay, so now that we have the starter off, it's probably hard to see, but now we have to take this bundle of wires off and then we should be able to just pull it right out. These are the wires that we need to take off, and I think they should all just come off with this one bolt here. Oops. And then we just took a photo because we aren't gonna remember the way they go on. Okay, one. Oh, and then these two. The purple one just pulls right out.
Once the wires were off, we could pull the starter out.
Here's the starter. This is the solenoid on top, and then the starter down here, and then this is the gears that actually turn the engine. So we're gonna take this to a shop and they're gonna hopefully rebuild it for us, and then yeah, in like a week or so we'll put everything back on the way we found it. So the other thing we noticed is that our belt has too much play. We did replace it probably a year or two ago, and so I think it just stretched out. It should have about a 1/4 inch play, so just like a little bit. So we're gonna tighten that up, and that's super easy. We just loosen this bolt here, push the tensioner down to tension it, and then tighten it back up, and then we should be good to go.
Tensioning the belt was super simple. We backed off the bolt on the tensioner just to loosen it, then pushed the tensioner arm down until the belt had about a 1/4 inch play. While keeping pressure on the tensioner arm, we tightened the bolt back up, making sure not to over tighten, just tight enough to keep the arm in place.
Good, much better. So we decided to get the starter rebuilt instead of buying a new one because there was a place just around the corner from us who did it, and it was way cheaper. I think the whole thing came out to be $110 with tax.
Here's the new starter.
That looks so good. He painted it up for us.
Yeah. This was the issue. Wear to contacts and fouling of surfaces. So they replaced the contacts and polished out wear from the plunger, clean out the case, polish the armature and brushes, clean out brush holder, and re-grease bearings. Re-greased drive bearings and polished out wear, reassembled and tested unit. Sounds like it was just completely fouled up. Didn't see those gears? I think that's where it
Oh yeah, wow.
shoots out and bites on.
So yeah, the starter's gonna go right in there. There's one hole right there, and then there's another one up here.
To reconnect the wires to the starter,
Purple goes in there. Yours might not be purple, ours is. And then the rest stack on this. Then you do a little nut. Not a nut, washer.
Lock.
And then bling, bling, bling. So basically we're gonna do the whole process but in reverse. So we have to start by disconnecting the batteries, turning the battery switch off so we don't get zapped, and then reinstall the starter. We're gonna put the wires on first because it should be easier, just because like the wires kind of go on the bottom. Okay, so this red goes on, and then these two.
Once we got the wires back on, we added the washer and the bolt. We tightened the bolt with a 1/2 inch socket, which was the same size as the 2 bolts holding the starter in place.
There we go.
Perfect, that looks good.
And then
That just goes boop.
boop.
The next step was to slip the starter back into place and line up the top and bottom holes to get the 2 bolts in. This ended up being difficult due to the space constraints, but it helped to have 2 sets of hands so one person could position the starter and the other could fit the bolt in. We struggled with the bolts for a while.
Well, I got it.
We finally got it in by getting the bottom bolt in place and tightening it just enough to help hold the starter. Then we could position the top bolt.
We did it! Took way longer than expected, but couple tips. Start with the bottom, because that's way easier to get at. And then for the bottom, well, for both bolts, we just finger tightened them to make sure they were in and not stripped. And then we used the ratchet. We used an extension for the top one, and you kind of have to go in from the back. I was trying to put it in from the top, which did not work, and then Jonas showed me how to do it. And then for the bottom one, we didn't need extension. We just did regular.
Get your hands in there.
Regular. So yeah, anyway, that took longer. It's just like really finicky. It's just really tight. So now we just need to connect a solenoid back to the battery and then try and start the engine. For a little backstory as well, last year we replaced the solenoid on the engine. We made a video about that as well. And so now that our solenoid and our starter are replaced, it's been starting really well. Yeah, so we're looking good for the summer cruising season.